Today, we're going to focus on your profile. Steve Murawski comes to us from USF Marine Sciences, and Steve has been continuously funded over $15 million in current awards, of which there are $9 million in his center grant from NOAA, his COMET grant. Great acronym, by the way. And he's a AAAS fellow and has received the Presidential Rank Award for Meritorious Service, and has an incredible history, not both on the sponsor side, having worked at NOAA, and from a researcher faculty side at USF, and mentor for many graduate students over the years. But when the rubber hits the road, he's a fisheries guy, has a boat. He's a researcher. He is comprehensive knowledge of the research process and the research enterprise, really benefits how we map our future, and mentors faculty and students on how to develop early career strategies and long range vision for research and innovation. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Steve Murawski.
Thanks, Sandy. I'll go ahead and share my screen if that's okay.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks. Again, thanks to Sandy and David for inviting me to participate. I did this workshop last year, and there was a tremendous number of really great questions, and much appreciated. What I'm going to do is go through a presentation that I've worked up over the years in terms of dealing with my graduate students and then other people that I've been involved with, and that is, some of what I would consider hard-earned observations about writing a successful proposal. And one thing I want to disabuse you of straight away is there is no secret sauce, in terms of being successful in this business. There's a number of things that successful people do. But there's no one sort of magic wand that makes these successful. It's really the product of a lot of hard work and sort of earning the respect of the funders over time, and that certainly does take a lot of hard work. So I want to emphasize the importance of mentoring in the grant process. Most of us are not born with a grantsmanship gene, and trying to understand this process, it's different depending on who's funding your work. So there's always a different flavor to the process. There are lots of people who have been successful over the years, and they're very willing to share their work, and this workshop that Sandy and David have put together is a really great one, because they talk a lot about the various components of this. I would say that there are lots of opportunities for both traditional and non-traditional mentoring, within people's departments, the more senior people that have been successful, and you can separate those from those that are not. Across a distributed university like our own, the University of South Florida, there's opportunities to cut across the various campuses, et cetera. And then also looking outside a particular university at a larger network of academia, but also, in private enterprise and the government as well. So I would say that, if this was easy, everybody would be doing it, and we wouldn't have these workshops. Being successful in grantsmanship is not easy. Generally, getting that first grant or those first few grants are the hardest part of this process, because you're trying to elbow into a very large field that's oversubscribed with people that want grants. And so getting those initial grants should be something that people are very proud of, because it is difficult. But then it gets a little easier over time as your reputation expands and your access to other resources expands as well. And so generally what I found is that over time you sort of, number one, get more experience under your belt in terms of how this process works, and also you tend to success tends to follow success. And so getting those first few grants is really the difficult part of this. I would also caution that even veterans of this process assume they can whip things together if there's an RFP that comes their way. And I would say almost universally, this approach is not successful. That understanding this larger process and being careful about the various steps is really the way to go here. And I would say lots of people make mistakes in the grant arena. And the biggest mistake that people make is being very last minute about getting the applications in and completing the process of having a really compelling grant statement to make. So just in terms of understanding grants as a process, there's lots of things that we all should be doing in what I would call the pre-RFP preparation. That is, you can anticipate that there will be a number of RFPs in your field that come out during the year. And there are a number of things that you can do, even if you don't know what the specific RFP is, to be prepared for that, so you don't have to be running around trying to find paperwork, trying to update things, et cetera. And so I wanted to talk about the pre-RFP preparation phase as the initial part of this. Then this sort of goes around the loop a little bit. And I would say, and I think this is probably what most people would say, that your idea is the key element of this process. And that is generating ideas that build upon what research you've done, that build upon the field, but also that make a significant contribution to the point where that contribution would be viewed as unique and potentially disruptive in the field. And so apart from all the mechanical parts of responding to an RFP, it's the idea that really kind of gets this going. Now, RFPs can be of many different flavors, and your approach to actually preparing a proposal and getting it funded can also be quite different. One of the biggest differences among the various RFPs and proposals is who is participating. Many times you'll have a single investigator applying, which may include a few graduate students and technicians, but more often these days we're finding that you're having a multi-investigator proposals that are being put together. This complicates the situation tremendously, because not only are you coordinating your own work, but you're trying to get everybody else's process together, all the information that you need and all the other investigators. And so this idea of who's on the proposal complicates the issue, and also means that you need more time in order to do it well. And so, waiting to the last minute with a very complicated proposal, it can almost guarantee that you're not going to be successful in something like that. Tying everything together, that is the idea, and who's involved and how much money you're allocating to what parts of the grant. That really becomes the sort of last bit of the submittal process, which includes submitting a complete proposal on time, not only to the research program within a particular university, that is, in our case at the University of South Florida, the Office of Research Administration, but also to the proposing entity as well. So then it becomes a choice of, whether your proposal is going to be accepted or not accepted, and where does this go? There are three potential paths. Once you've submitted your proposal and you get an answer back, number one, it can be accepted, which means you go into this negotiation phase. Number two, it can be rejected, in which case it can kind of take two trajectories. You can put it in your personal recycling bin, which means that you can use bits and pieces of this potentially later. Or sometimes it's possible to actually negotiate with the grantor. I don't necessarily think that this is a great strategy for most early careers in terms of trying to contest a rejection. It's possible based on, if there was a faulty understanding of what you actually did to do this, but I would kind of save that one for either something that, really went wrong, or people with a little more standing in the field, because what you don't want to do is get the program officers thinking that, you're just going to complain all the time. Most of their job is actually informing people that they didn't get the grant, so you don't want to be, a sore loser. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And then the last part of this whole process is the execution of the grant. And, just because you got the money, number one, doesn't mean there aren't enormous strings attached to it. And it kind of depends on the grantor. But some of these strings can be extensive in terms of reporting. Some grants may be an annual report. I've got many grants that require quarterly reports, which include both financial aspects of the grant and also progress on what's going on. And so it almost becomes a full-time job just administering the grant. And then the last part of this is, whether you want to actually use the negotiation that you've been involved with to actually influence the RFP process itself. And that I'll talk about that in a little bit, that this notion of shaping the battlefield by your personal intervention is an idea that a lot of senior people get involved with, and you shouldn't wait around until you're a senior person to think in those kinds of terms. So in terms of the pre-RFP preparation, I wanted to make a couple of points. First of all, becoming part of the RFP process. It's one thing for us to sort of sit around and wait for RFPs to come out and by the National Science Foundation or National Institute of Health, other grantors, private industry. It's another issue to actually become part of this process. So how do you become parts of this process? First of all, identify who the program officers are in the area of your expertise. And the program officers actually like not only being part of a specific grant, but also understanding what the community is and interacting with the community. I mean, that's the reason they're there. And so if you send an email to a program officer that is in your specific area and say, look, I'd like to volunteer to sit on review panels or do mail-in reviews of things, so I can get a sense of, how other people approach proposals, and you'll learn a lot from that. And also, sitting on these panels where, you have to review 10 or 15 proposals and defend, a particular proposal that you find compelling. That actually sharpens your own skills in terms of the proposals you write. And you can get some sense of, how a panel would view whatever research you're interested in versus other things that they see. And so I think it gives people a different perspective on how that would work. And so my recommendation, particularly for early careers, is actually identify a few program officers and send them a cold email and say, look, I'm a new researcher. I'm working in this field. I'd like to volunteer to either do mail away reviews or sit on panels. And they like the notion of communicating, directly with them. It's not a negative. And so this notion of helping to not only learn about the process from the RFPs that come out, but also sharing your ideas with the program officers about, gee, maybe you should think about, in the upcoming RFP, thinking about this particular field, which you may have some expertise in, and, having that kind of dialogue, it doesn't hurt. So in this RFP thing, the other kinds of things that you can do to sort of keep on top of this is have a certain number of things ready to roll. And that is, I can't tell you how many times people are just, fumbling around trying to update their CV, trying to update their current and pending, which is all the grants you have currently and anything that you have pending in terms of an RFP that hasn't been decided yet. Their list of collaborators, and then the contact information of the research administrators. All of these things you can update. And again, when you're trying to write a proposal, deal with other people that may be on it, having to update all this stuff, under duress. Usually you make mistakes, or it's always kind of the last minute thing. Having this in a file folder, on your computer that you update, casually from every once in a while, will save you a lot of time and effort. And one thing I didn't put down here as well, one of the big bugaboos in a lot of proposals is, particularly if you've got multiple people that are involved in it, is keeping track of all the references that you're using in your proposal. A lot of times the references don't count on the page count, but your collaborators will give you references that are partial. They may not give you any reference at all. They'll just maybe give you the authors and a date, which may or may not be correct. And so as the lead on a multi-authored proposal, I can't tell you how much time and effort it takes to do this. So use a database thing like EndNote or another one, so that you can, number one, have all those references available to you, and number two, that it can be reformatted, for a particular format type that a particular proposer might want. And so that'll save you a lot of heartburn in terms of actually doing the proposal. The next point I wanted to talk about was developing a long-term strategy for proposals. And that is, it's one thing to get maybe a couple $100,000 proposal funded to do a specific project. With that kind of money, you're not talking about long-term, large proposals that would be all encompassing. But what you want to do is, at least I think you do, is try to string things together that build upon the previous proposal and maybe sets the stage for larger things down the road, so that instead of just sort of chasing a bit of money here and there, that there's actually a theme to what you're trying to accomplish, and so there's some continuity. And so developing a long-term strategy to say, hey, I'm interested in whatever it is in terms of a large societal goal, but I'm going to start over here, and I'll find a pathway to these larger, more complicated things, which may be more money. And so developing that sort of perspective on, where do I want to start and where do I want to end under a thematic area, I think is an important one. And the last thing I wanted to emphasize was kind of keeping the funders in the loop in terms of your successes. A lot of times they will, ask you to identify the research products you have. And part of the reason that they ask you to do that is they have to tell their story as well. And that is, from this large, series of grants we made, what did we accomplish, right? And so helping them tell their story, your story, through their access to media, et cetera, is going to make them feel pretty good about, dealing with you. And so if you have, a great paper you've published and you have the internal media, say within a university doing that, keep the funders in mind too, because they want to get credit for helping you tell your story. And so keeping that process alive is important. So on the RFP side, there's this sort of chicken and egg thing about, an idea looking for an RFP or an RFP looking for an idea. There's no unique sense of this. I mean, a lot of, I have a lot of ideas that, I try to see if I can shoehorn in one RFP or another. On the other hand, there are RFPs which are, they're out there fishing a little bit, for good ideas. And so there's no one answer to this. What you don't want to do is to so shoehorn an idea that you have into something that really is a square peg and a round hole that has no chance of success. And so this notion of an idea looking for an RFP, I mean, I have a number of those in mind, and in fact, I'm working on one now. But you really have to be responsive to whatever RFPs come out, because I mean, that's the nature of the game. And so we talked about shaping the RFPs, but you really have to deal with what's there and get some idea of what's going to be successful. And this idea of what's going to be successful is another emphasis back to the program managers. If you have an idea that's looking for an RFP and you see one come out, you can actually go to the program officer and say, hey, look, I'm thinking about this in relation to the RFP you just sent out. What are your thoughts about that? And sometimes they'll say, no, that's not really what we're looking for. And, just don't bother, which is going to save you an enormous amount of time and effort and heartburn. On the other hand, it could be that you can convince them that, hey, this is a pretty good idea, and be on the lookout for it. So again, where do good ideas come from? Sometimes they're triggered by this RFP, and sometimes it's really that nagging idea you've got in the back of your head. This whole notion of finding the money, I can tell you that Sandy is an enormous resource, and she sends out all kinds of blasts to the researchers in our particular university. And a lot of these successful grants are coming off the spreadsheets and whatnot she sends out. But really, the most important aspect is the money is where you find it. And that is, your field better than most people. And so who's there, both in terms of the federal government, state governments, private enterprise, et cetera. You have to go out and kick your cans yourself. You can't rely on research administrators to drop something in your lap. If you want to, be the captain of your own ship, you need to really find those funding sources, and don't assume that they'll necessarily show up in your email. You have to actually, look at grants.gov and other things. And, in the areas that you're interested in, a lot of times you just have to go down the list and see what's being offered. And those things change very frequently. And so being on the lookout, for grant opportunities is an important one. I would say that big RFPs, ones that involve a lot of money, generally have frequently asked questions, lists, and ways to communicate with the proposer. So, going through those facts and all the questions you may have about, how to do the grant, or, particular nuance of it are useful. And if you have a question on those grants, you can always send that in to these facts, and the program officers will generally answer it. So that's important. The last part of this sort of RFP section I wanted to emphasize is it's sort of like that quiz you had in undergrad, where the professor puts out a thing, and the first thing they say is read the entire quiz, and then the last thing in the quiz is sign your name and hand it in. And people that generally don't read the last line, and they're doing all this work for nothing. Really, it's important to read the entire proposal and take notes on it before you start this process, because many times there's little things they're subtle in the proposal, which either are going to help you enormously, or basically say, look, I can't do this. Sometimes, for example, they'll say, oh, by the way, you need a 50% match on this, and if you don't have access to something that'll match, why bother? And so reading and taking notes on the entire proposal, things like proposal length. There have been some real horror stories of people, converting from Word document to PDFs, and your PDF goes over one line on a page limit, out it goes, and so understanding, things like page limits, and, all the nuances of a proposal, sometimes, there can be a lot of constraints on an RFP, and understanding them fully is going to save a lot of heartburn, and it doesn't take you that long to read an RFP. So, as I said before, a really compelling idea is the most important part of this entire process. but, and certainly it's a necessary component, but it's an insufficient component for successful proposals. That is, just because you got a great idea that's going to revolutionize the world, you know, there's a lot of bean counters in the world too. And so they're going to look at the number of pages you've got, and they're going to make sure that you've got your data management plan, and they're going to have a mentoring plan for postdocs, et cetera, et cetera. You got to make sure all the pieces are there, right? So, and a lot of times, like for example, NSF proposals, they actually won't let you submit unless you actually fill in something, which is good. But nevertheless, you don't want to just be putting things in. You want to have really good parts to all your proposal. One of the things I would caution against is trying not to be too incremental. That is, you've got this idea, and there's only so much money you can have, and so I'll just sort of take an existing methodology and I'll add a little bit to it, and get that funded. I would say there's this notion of disruptive ideas is kind of in vogue now. That is, we can do this particular activity better, cheaper, and faster, and it's going to revolutionize what we're doing. There's a lot of exaggeration in a lot of this, but nevertheless, trying to focus on ideas that really do move the science forward and are not incremental is important. And again, as I said before, stringing research proposals together to add up to big accomplishments. One thing you have to be aware of here is, if you get to be a bit of a proposal mill, you have to be aware of potential for double dipping. That is, if you basically take the same idea and give it another name and send it to two different funders, because you think you're going to double your chances. These funders communicate, and also, it kind of depends also on who they send it to, and so you have to be careful and aware that you may have a general theme to what you're doing, but you need to make sure that they separate enough so you can emphasize their distinction. And you have to really be careful of double dipping, because if you get sort of, tagged as a person would do that, then, you're likely to get nothing out of the deal. So this notion of whiteboarding, ideas, is one that I particularly appreciate in some of the more complicated proposals that I've been involved with that involve multiple disciplines. It's really helped out in terms of just, getting, people to really switch on in terms of the collaboration. So this is a general graphic, but this particular graphic is actually one that came off my whiteboard. And this was a graphic that allowed us to compete and actually get a $36 million grant from something called the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative, which was a big funder, funded about $500 million worth of research. And so this particular idea, and again, this was a whiteboard with all kinds of crazy colors and everything on it, tried to figure out, from left to right, what happens during an oil spill like Deepwater Horizon. Where does the oil go, the fate of the oil, and then what does it influence? And so all of these arrows were actually subcomponents of this proposal, which actually involved many investigators. This particular proposal had 15 organizations, academic institutions, et cetera, involved in it, and about 125 investigators. So doing a thought exercise, literally a physical thought exercise in a whiteboard, even for simple proposals, it allows you to, engage with a group of people and think of all the things that you as an individual, didn't think of, that actually might complicate the situation. And again, I'm really an advocate for working in groups that can force multiply whatever you can bring to the table. And so I learned a lot about, most of that stuff on the left-hand side of this, I have no knowledge of whatsoever. And I can talk about it now, but my discipline is over on the right-hand side of this thing. So who to partner with, if anyone? One of the questions that we always have about proposals is when to write as a co-PI on another PI's proposal versus being the PI. And I've done it both ways. It's a difficult question to answer. If you've got a large proposal, the principal investigator has a big job making sure that all the cattle are in the fence, and that all the divvying up of the resources takes place. This is an individual decision. One of the important aspects is, the money is still as green as it was, even if you are a co-PI on somebody else's proposal. You don't necessarily get the full credit, in terms of your institution, but again, it kind of depends a little bit on how much time you have available, and whether or not you're the thought leader in this particular domain, right? A difficult question, but again, you shouldn't always look at being a co-PI as a negative. Sometimes you can associate with more experienced people in your field which have larger reputations, and that actually helps to build your reputation as well. So I would say that one of the things that funders look at in terms of this arrangement with PIs and co-PIs, they'll look at a track record of publications and other intellectual output concerning the topic. If you have a sort of a thin resume in that topic, perhaps being a co-PI for a couple of rounds where you do get co-publications, is a useful part of this. So how do you select partners? If you've got a big idea, do you go with the big names in the field? Okay. Do you go with friends, people that are in your network or you've associated with in the past, or people you went to school with? Do you make cold calls? Surely, sometimes people are just waiting to be asked, and then one thing that I really like to do in terms of potential partners is people that you have heard speak about the field. You get some sense of people's awareness, not only of the work they do, but just how they view the field, and that's sort of like a pre-proposal interview, And so if there are people that you hear speak and you think they have a really good grasp on it, those are useful people to approach as well. So I would say, just in terms of considering, all of these aspects, all of these methods for picking partners in proposals work. Some work better than others, and then at some point, you'll be looked at as a big name, and people will be coming to you. And so, don't forget the small people. When you partner with other people as well. Who's running the show? In multiple investigator RFPs, this is a really important question. It's really important to have clear authority. Somebody has to make hard decisions, particularly about money. And I would say that, these things are not necessarily a democracy. Not everything needs to be transparent to everyone. You're dealing with people's personally identifiable information, their salary rates, et cetera. You're running the show means you're going to, if you have to make hard decisions about, capping the money or you have to reduce the budgets, sure, this breeds, some hard feelings sometimes. And you have to be tactful about it, but that comes with running the show. You have to make hard decisions, and people will respect it. Particularly if you're transparent about the fact that you have to make these decisions. And again, nobody has to know all the transactional details of everything you're doing, but just to understand that there's a process and a logic behind it is important. So in terms of tying it all together, bringing all these compelling ideas and the logistical challenges and the skills together is difficult, but, honestly, this is something that I really enjoy. That is, that you saw that whiteboard thing before, a really difficult question. This is, difficult and time consuming, and, faculty people are dragged in different directions, teaching and research and public service, but nevertheless, if you're good at it, it can be very rewarding as a primary activity. Drafting assignments for proposals, particularly multiple investigator, you need to constrain, there's always constraints on these proposals, the space, the scope, the kinds of, stories you tell, references, again, those are big problems. What you don't want to do is to, sort of say, all right, give me what you think about you want to do on this proposal, and then we'll kind of put it all together. Somebody's got to go through and outline this thing and make sure that you don't over ask in terms of what you're expecting. Use of graphics and diagrams. I would say that a good flow diagram creates linkages in the reviewer's minds, and it shows how you've contemplated putting all the pieces together. Just give you an example. This was an example from the $36 million proposal that we put together. What we try to do is actually break it down into a series of tasks. There's a modeling task, a series of laboratory studies, and a series of field studies. This is how all the different components actually fit together. And so this was very helpful to the reviewers so that they could see, all right, well, for example, this T2, which is a high pressure laboratory facility, it's used in the models, it's used in some of the field studies, et cetera, so you get some sense of how the pieces fit together. So some judicious flow diagrams are usually helpful. What's in the title? It's interesting. Some of the do's are make it short, make it descriptive, have some outcome oriented, and maybe a question oriented one. What a big set of don'ts are is making it cute, making it confusing, hyphenated things. Those are overdone and certainly boring, and torturing your acronyms to the point where you try to get something cute that really isn't on mark. And down below are a few acronyms that people put together for the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative. And think of how you would react to the first three. Depend. I mean, we all know what depends are, right? That was the big joke when that one came out. GISR, the people that proposed that called it geyser. Everybody else called it geezer, right? Which is a bunch of old people sitting around, right? And then drops. Drops like you drop something, right? So as opposed to some of the other ones, right? So just be cognizant that you are what your title says you are, right? And so creating a completed proposal, read and digest the fine print, many horror stories about people, not understanding that there was a poison pill in that RFP, right? Know the deadlines. Don't wait to push the button to the last day, hour, or minute. Research administration will they'll maybe give you one aspect of that, but don't count on them to stay until 5 o'clock on the deadline day, to push the button for you. Submissions after the deadline are DOA. There's no late homework in this business. And then, making your proposal easy to read and contextualize, and then again, asking a lot of questions. This proposal over here, this is not necessarily a model, but that was over a 500-page proposal that was submitted and actually successful. And that is sort of torturing people. But so what information should the proposals convey? When you get right down to it, what do you want to do? Why is it important? Who cares whether you did it or not? How much does it cost? And what are the outputs and outcomes? You can write a proposal where all this stuff is hidden, Or you can write a proposal that actually has these as the, the subject lines. Make it easy on your panel reviewers. I mean, if they're looking at 10 or 15 proposals, don't make it, so they have to hunt around with a yellow marker and try to find the answer to these questions. I mean, these are basically, the things that people are going to want to evaluate your proposal on. So how and who writes a multi-investigator proposal? I've talked a little bit about this. There are lots of different proposals, ways that investigators do this. Having each investigator write a few pages. This is not a especially good idea because it doesn't become integrated. And good proposals, on the other hand, have a single voice, a flow, and a logical organization, maybe with a diagram, and are balanced in terms of the depth. If you've got a multidisciplinary project, you want to make sure that, you don't go off on, a tangent with part of this, and then, it's too thin on the others. And then also just a note on practical language. If you have to look up a word in a dictionary to see what it means, you probably shouldn't use it in a proposal. I mean, remember, a lot of people that'll be reviewing your proposal, maybe English isn't their first language. Make it easy to read and have a voice to it. So if the answer is no, number one, don't take it personally or be discouraged. And I always tell the story that, hitting a 333 in baseball gets you to Cooperstown, it gets you to the Hall of Fame, and so even experienced proposal generators strike out more than they hit. And I can tell you that. And I've had 3 proposals rejected this year already. So, don't take it personally, right? Ask to see the review summaries. Ask the grant, and a lot of times, people forget that, they get the rejection letter and they throw it away. Well, ask to see the summaries, because it could be, number one, they misunderstood what you said, and number two, this issue of asking the grantor or the program officer, how can I make my next proposal more competitive? And that is learn from these things, right? Third, don't become a sore loser or an obnoxious winner. Sure. I mean, like you say, if you're batting 333, that means you lose 2 times out of 3. Don't be sore loser. Nor, if you are able to hit on one that's really important to you, remember your colleagues are in judgment of your proposals, in the field, right? And last, recycle the proposals. If you answer is no, you can incorporate the feedback you get, change the proposal. Maybe next year, the next time around, you can ask the program officer if it's appropriate for you to recycle. If yes, most funders will want to negotiate with your final award, probably downward from what you asked for. You need to push back if it's too little for the objectives. Don't automatically say yeah just because you got some good money. And sometimes you'll just get a percentage of what you need, and you need to figure it out. And then the situation, when is no really no, pretty much left to people that can afford to antagonize the program officers, right? So executing the grant, if the grant is complex, you really should think about funding for professional grants management. A lot of times it's, these are professionals that do this. And so, if it's taken away from your time to do other things, probably worthwhile. Got to pay attention to reporting requirements. Good program officer does not like to be hassling people for late reports all the time. And then lastly, celebrate your victories as team accomplishments, including the grant management staff and the funders themselves. Your success is their success. And I would tell you that, having a group achievement award like this one from USF World for a grant that we had for many years, that creates a lot of upward charity in the system. So celebrate your victories. So with that, Sandy, be happy to stop sharing and take any questions there might be.
Thank you, Dr. Murawski. There are some questions. David?
Dr. Murawski, going back to your selection of co-PIs, do you actually need to have a big name if you're assembling a team that's all early career scientists? And then a follow-up to that, in what situation might you include big names on an advisory?
That's a really good one, and I don't think there's any specific answer to it. I do think that you know, the most important part of this is the good idea. And so if it's a group of early career investigators, no, you don't need a big name for that. You know, citing the work of big names, you know, particularly, you know, if that goes out to review to, you know, some of these folks, can be helpful, you know, if it's relevant to the proposal. So no, I don't think it's a necessary requirement. Again, it's the idea that counts. And I do think that, you know, finding a balance here so that, you know, you don't always look like you're in the shadow of a more mature investigator is important.
Terrific. And then earlier, you had stated that people should find out who their program officers are. They should let people know they would like to sit as a reviewer or volunteer or sit on a panel. How do you locate individuals like that to notify or to volunteer on a larger scale?
Yep, no, that's a really good one. And, you know, a lot of times what you'll see in an RFP, particularly if it's from a federal agency, is there'll be a point of contact there, you know, for questions or whatnot. And again, you know, as you become more facile, you tend to know, you know, who's in the main line of program officers. A lot of times, for example, in National Science Foundation, you go to their websites, and each of the programs has a website which includes the you know, the primary director and then the program officers. And so it's a matter of snooping around the internet a little bit and also looking at the RFP to see who the point of contact is. And then you contact that person and they say, no, well, this is being administered by this other person. So you can pretty much rapidly figure it out.
Okay, and then this is more a question, I think, of style, but what's your opinion on bolding, using bolding to highlight key elements, not just headings, but within a paragraph? Is that a good thing? When would you consider that to be overdone?
I assume you mean bolding in terms of fonts and that kind of thing? Yeah, okay. So, you know, each RFP may have its own style requirements, but I would say subheadings, headings probably, you know, bolded, subheadings can be bolded or italicized. Within a paragraph, if I have an important point to make, I try not to like if there's a compelling sentence, I can remember, you know, bolding that sentence, particularly if it's responsive to a specific in the RFP. You know, again, the whole point is don't make it hard to find the chestnuts here, you know, for a reviewer. So if there's something that's very responsive to the thing, I've done it before. And a lot of times, you'll see on the reviewers' comments, they will bold, you know, something that you've done. So I wouldn't be shy about it.
Those are all the questions I have for you, Chair.
Okay.
Really terrific job, always. And there are a number of comments in chat that speak to how incredibly useful your presentation is, and especially for early career grant writers. So thank you. This was extremely helpful.
Very welcome, and good luck to everybody.